excited. Welcome to today's virtual masterclass. I know that last month I put out words saying, really sorry, I would love to do one, but I'm exhausted after having COVID and I just can't. So I know last month I said, just pick a virtual masterclass that we've already recorded. You can watch that. But I've actually been trying to persuade Maura for a couple of months now to come onto this webinar. She's nodding. She knows this is true. And she is I wouldn't even know where to start. In fact, my heart beats faster when I speak of Maura because we actually grew up next door to each other. And I always tell her that I knew her from before she was born because she's younger than me, even though she has way more qualifications tagged after her name than I do. But Maura is no longer my neighbor running around next door, although she does live fairly close. But she is the head of clinical psychology at Khayelitsha Hospital, which is an incredibly challenging role. So I think if anybody knows about resilience, it's Maura. And I can testify to the type of work she does. I mean, she works every day with people who are under stress, people of different cultures, ages, life stages, mostly with people who are wanting to commit suicide. So to be able to deal with and help people like that, you really have to be resilient. Maura completed her master's at UCT and her doctorate at Stellenbosch University, so a little bit of both. For the UCT, that's me, and my husband Reinhard Stellenbosch, so there we go. And her perspective on mental health, she says, I'm not sure if everybody gets this if you're not a psychologist, is from an integrative psychodynamic perspective. But for those of us who want to just make it practical, it's really her catchphrase, how to make the lemonade out of the lemons that life throws at you. And I think, Maura, I'm so excited about this topic because we've all had lemons thrown at us, COVID or no COVID. So it's wonderful to learn more about what resilience means. And from my perspective of training hiring managers over the last 15 years on how to hire people and hire the right people and create thriving teams through a competency-based approach to interviews and create a positive candidate experience, it's so important for people to understand what they're assessing. Because it's become this really popular term. I'm sure you can all attest to that. Every job description has got resilience in it. In fact, I spoke to an MD of a recruitment company the other day, and she said they've added this officially to their job description requirements. If you are not resilient, you will not make it. And so it's important from that perspective. And I think also, I mean, one of my delights is really helping candidates have the confidence and skills they need to succeed in interviews. And so it's so important for them to really understand, why is someone asking me about resilience and what does that mean? How do I answer it? So I thought, let's just cut to the chase and get a professional opinion on this, really understand what it means. So Maura, over to you. Maybe we can just start off by telling us, what does resilience actually mean?
Okay, great. Well, hi to everybody. It's nice to see some of your faces and those I can't see. I see Sanda has also joined. So hi, Sanda. She's in PE. So, but yeah, so thanks for including me. I actually didn't want to talk on this topic because I think it's such a unfolding topic. You know, resilience is, I think, every stage of life teaches you more about resilience. So when are you ever an expert on resilience? So I'm not an expert on resilience because I don't think anyone is an expert on resilience. But basically how I see it is resilience is that, you know, life is going to throw us all lemons. I mean, we know that saying that adversity does not discriminate. We are all going to go through hard times, whether we like it or not. I mean, my mother always had the saying that no one gets out of life alive. And it's true, which means that there's other people who are going to be absolutely heartbroken by your death, by how you die, you know. And so and then we're heartbroken by people who are dying around us. And that's just death, let alone job losses, let alone animals dying, let alone, you like someone and they don't like you back. And so throughout life, we just get hit by these lemons. And I think resilience for me is learning how to make that lemonade, how to say, okay, so what do I do with all of these things thrown at me? And so I think the first thing that makes a resilient person is someone who can acknowledge that, who's able to say, not why me, but absolutely, this is a part of life. Struggles are a part of life. Challenges, changes. I mean, I think of in a work environment that doesn't need this, I do this job description and that's all I can do. And if you try change anything, I'm going to fall apart. That's not a resilient person. A resilient person is that challenges are a part of life. Difficulties are a part of life. Change is a part of life. So I think that's definitely a first criteria. And I think a part with that is that a resilient person realizes that they're not entitled to this perfect life. And I think so much of who we are as humans is we strive for this happiness. We strive for, this life with nothing ever wrong goes on. And we just want to be happy and we just want only good things to happen. Okay, that's not resilience. So if that's where you're striving for, that won't help you to be resilient. I think the second thing of a resilient person is that they focus on things that they can change and not on things that they can't change. And with that, I think, naturally, and this is true of all of us, naturally we focus on the negative. It's really interesting. It's, 20 good things happen, that one bad thing happens, and guess what? You come home and the first thing you want to talk about is the bad thing. And that really can keep us stuck and hold us back. And so there's this new catchphrase in psychology, which I'm sure a lot of you've heard about it. It's called mindfulness, reflection, meditation. There's different words for it. But basically what that is just taking a moment and being able to... Okay, so it's being able to take a moment and just to be able to reflect on your day in a healthy, holistic way, instead of just focusing on the negative, because that's where our brain wants to focus. It just wants to focus on the negative. A lot of times, when our brain is focused on the negative, what do we think about? Why did this happen? Why me? Why is life always throwing so many lemons at me? And that can be very unhealthy thinking versus a thinking of what next. So changing those why questions to what questions. Okay, so what can I do next? Instead of why did my mom die? Okay, what can I do now to honor her right now? Because the truth is we'll never know why. And I know lots of people want to try and make meaning. They want to go into this. So my mom died so that I will find this new friend, and it can seem helpful and it can seem healthy, but what research has showed us that in a year, if you look at those two types of people, the person that goes down the why path and the person that goes down the what path, in a year, normally they found that the people in the why path are in a worse space than the people who have gone down the what path. 2/3 of who we are is learned behavior. Isn't that interesting? You'd think more of it is learned behavior, but 1/3 is DNA. There's nothing you can change about it. But 2/3 is actually about, we've learned how to behave. We've learned what to think about. We've learned what to focus on. And what a resilient person does is able to sit down after the day and reflect in a holistic way over the day. Not just focusing on the negative, but also focusing on, okay, what was good about it? What made this day special? What gave me color in my day? It's my new catchphrase about bringing color into your day. What can I learn from this day? Versus, man, why did this happen? And why was my children angry? And why, which is not healthy. And I think thirdly, a resilient person can ask themselves, is what I am doing helping me or harming me? And I think that also comes down to, of course, self-awareness. Because I think sometimes we also can get stuck in behaviors and we know that this is not healthy. I listened to a talk the other day, and the woman asked it in a different way. She said, if I loved myself, would I continue doing this? Okay. And I think sometimes, we would never want people we love to do certain behaviors, but sometimes we find it acceptable to do those behaviors. We stay in a job that we know is not healthy. We stay in relationships that can be abusive or hurtful, but we just continue staying in them because we think, well, I have to. But a resilient person can reflect and say, man, is what I'm doing helping me or harming me? And if it's harming me, what are the steps that I can do to get out of it, instead of why do I keep doing this? Does that make sense? So I think in a nutshell, if I had to describe resilience, that's how I would describe it.
Thanks, Maura. That feels like more than a nutshell. That feels like some wonderful detail. And I really appreciate you being so clear about it, because it has become such a fuzzy definition. And everyone wants resilience and says people must be resilient. But if everyone has a different definition of that, how will we know if we really are hiring resilience? And I think something that fascinates me along with that is that when people say a manager is making a hiring decision, if they really understand what resilience is, they will probably look for those behaviors. So you mentioned the candidate or the person who's going to join their team that doesn't feel entitled and doesn't, ask why all the time. They actually ask what, that they focus on what they can change, that they look at things holistically, and that they have the awareness and the self-control to focus on what is helping and not hurting them. But I think that sometimes there are certain behaviors that show up in people that look like resilient behaviors, but they're actually not. So in your knowledge and experience, what are typical behaviors that get mistaken for resilience, but actually they're not resilience?
Yeah, I mean, that is a good one, because I think again, remember, 2/3 of who we are is what we've learned over the years. So sometimes we can watch someone and think, well, it must be resilient behavior, and it really isn't. And I think a couple of things I would think about is this over positivity. And I think, what I'm not talking about is the person that is realistic and says, man, life is throwing me lemons, if we can go back to that. And sure, it's hard, but I can persevere, and look how much I have been blessed in other aspects. But it's that person who can't even acknowledge the hardships, where it's just, no, everything is wonderful, and we'll just keep going, and we'll just keep, and they can't even acknowledge their emotions, because I think emotion is very helpful for us understanding ourselves, and you meet these people that you notice that they're angry, but they won't even go there. No, we must just keep fighting, and we just keep smiling. And they have these little mantras that they kind of say to themselves, and they just repeat over and over again. And that's not resilience, because that's called denial. And that's a whole other conversation we can have. I think that denial is not resilience. I think also sometimes resilience can be seen as just pushing through everything. And I think absolutely we need to be tough, that we have to do hard things. And life, there is hard things to do. But I think it's also having the awareness of yourself to realize when to say enough, that if it's, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's with a manager or in a job, whether it's with your studies, whether it's with whatever, where you're able to say, man, I've pushed through enough, and this is not helpful anymore. And I think you see that so often with people, I don't know if you ever read those quotes, when people are 100 years old, and what do they regret? And I think sometimes people have said, it's working for a boss that didn't care about me, but just still pushing through because that's what I thought I had to do. I think it's being able to know, when it's pushing through versus when it's harmful. And so somebody who works 60, 70, 80 hours a week, I don't know if they're necessarily resilient or they're trying to run away from something. And so I think I would definitely ask that, people who are just one-sided focus. I think resilience is having a balanced life. I think that's one of the big things, that's being able to see life, like we said, holistically, with the good and the bad. And when you've just got somebody who's just too focused and inflexible to life and situations, they can look really tough and they can look really strong. But the problem is a lot of times with those people, when they're put in challenges, unfortunately, because they're not flexible, they can snap easily. And then you'll have a different ball game of problems.
Very good points, Maura. And I think sometimes what I hear from hiring managers is that when they interview someone, they often ask that question, what are your weaknesses? Now, that isn't really a competency-based question. It's a bit of an old-fashioned question, but it still gets asked. And sometimes they're happy if they hear the weakness, I'm a workaholic, or I'm a perfectionist, because they think that's fantastic. We're going to have someone who works here 24/7 and, come on in with your weakness. But as you say, that might be something quite short-lived. And it doesn't mean that that person will be resilient because they might be running away from something. So a more healthy response, if we're looking at your definition, is then I have a certain, whatever the weakness may be, but here's what I've learned, or here's what I'm doing. And they can give that holistic view, and they can show that they can learn from it. As you said earlier, it's being able to look at things. Are they helping me? Are they hurting me? It's also being able to look at what can I change and focusing on that. And so I usually encourage managers or recruiters to ask that question and probe to try and get a story from a candidate around what their weakness is, but to also see, are they learning from it? Are they growing? And I encourage candidates to be honest in their response when they do get asked that question. But again, not just to say the thing that sounds good, but to be able to tell a story about how they've learned from it, or how they've moved on or are moving on. So it's almost that acceptance of everything isn't all good or all bad.
Absolutely.
So resilience is being able to look at both.
Absolutely. I think it is so important, because I think it's sometimes we can feel, and I think you can want to put that good, that's the good appearance first, and you want to, and I think it can be a scary place to be, because I think in a company, especially with recruiting, there are going to be challenges, and I think it's to be able to acknowledge the challenges and what would you do next. So.
Yes. And I think ever since we originally spoke about this, your mention around the what versus the why has really stuck with me, because often people in an interview, to their detriment, they'll say things like, yeah, they will behave entitled. It'll be all about me, and things weren't working out for me, and that's why I left. And there's almost a sense of it shouldn't, I should deserve something better. So, of course, as you're saying, we shouldn't stick with something that's hurting us. And there's been a lot more emphasis around empathetic leadership during the pandemic. But at the same time, life is tough. And sometimes, especially with people starting off in their career, yeah, there are those times where you've just got to stick through and learn, and it's not all going to be perfect. But yeah, what do we do with that? And I think the people who hop from job to job every time there's a challenge are the less resilient people. And they may kind of cloak it in, I deserve better. But yeah, I wonder how much resilience is below that. So Maura, something that I think is probably on a lot of people's hearts and minds is, you said that 2/3 of our behavior is something that is learned or can be learned. Because I think sometimes people feel like, okay, either I'm resilient or I'm not. or a manager will feel like either my staff are resilient or not, or this candidate is resilient or not. But if we're thinking about building it and learning it, what are practical steps that you can share that people could hold on to or share with people they know that need to build resilience?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I definitely feel is self-awareness, is getting to know yourself. You know, what are things that hurt you? What are things that encourage you? You know, I mean, I've listened to a lot of these podcasts. I've been to many talks, you know, and one of the big things they say is exercise. Everyone must exercise. But I think the problem is with that is not one size fits all. Okay. And what does that mean? What does that look like? Maybe exercise for you is going for a walk. Maybe exercise for you is sitting on a bench. I mean, I don't know. And I think that sort of stuff, you know, so lots of practicals that I've heard previously is, and I mean, I do think they are healthy. And I'm not saying that they're not, but sometimes it's like, okay, so I exercise, I socialize, I eat healthy. Am I resilient now? And of course, those are all healthy behaviors. And I think it's important. But I do think self-awareness, just sitting with yourself and understanding what makes you happy, you know, what brings you energy, what takes away your energy. Is it people? Is it challenges? Is it puzzles? You know, because I think once you can understand yourself, and we all have it, we all have things that help us and things that hurt us. Um, and noticing yourself in those scenarios that do hurt you. So what happens to me in those scenarios, whether it's in a work environment, because we are talking about work. So in a work environment, what happens in those environments that shut me down, or what hurts me, you know? And then, like I said, mentioned previously, that taking stock, taking that 10 minutes to sit down and to reflect, you know, journaling. So what happened? Why did I respond? Or why did I notice my anxiety increase? Or why did I notice feeling very angry? What happened in that moment? You know, I think it's taking stock of, okay, wow, but this scenario happened and I responded so differently. You know what? Why was it different? Was it a person? Was it my frame? Was it that I had slept and that I had eaten well? Like what makes it different? And we don't take enough time to do that. We don't take enough time just to think about your day, to think about, because what happens is, because we're so focused on the negative, you know, what you focus on, that becomes your reality, right? So for instance, if I say to you all now, don't think, you can think about anything, think about absolutely anything, but just don't think about a white elephant, okay? Just don't think about a white elephant, but think about anything. Just think about anything, but don't think about a white elephant. So what happened? Guess what? You're thinking about a white elephant, you know? And I think that's the whole thing, is sometimes is don't think about the negative, don't think about the negative. But I think, and then we focus only on the negative. So bringing in, okay, so let's think about why the negative hurt me. And then if you're doing this on a consistent basis, what you're helping your brain, what you're training your brain, should I say, to do, is you're training your brain not just to focus on the negative, to focus on the positive. And then the next day you have a similar situation. And what happens is your neurons are firing, but then you're also thinking, oh my word, this situation happened yesterday. So now your brain is aware, you know, and if you keep doing it consistently, you will also notice, wow, I chose to react differently than that first time when I started to reflect on what I did. And then you can start celebrating those victories. Oh, so previously I took this manager so personally, but now I can see I'm not taking that manager so personally. And you're rewiring your brain through these different interactions in these different situations. And I know it sounds, but I mean, but change happens in small steps. We know when we try to change things in big steps, it's never long lasting. You know, those people who do these amazing diets, and what happens? You see them a month later and they're not on the diet, you know, or a year later and they're bigger than what they were. But it's those small decisions. It's every day sitting down and saying, okay, for 5 minutes, I'm just going to reflect on the day. And I'm not going to just reflect on the negative, I'm going to reflect on the positive. So if you're able to just reflect on small increments, I think it's choosing the what question. So when you see yourself going down the why me and why this and why did my friend do so much better and my thing was better, it's stopping and saying, okay, let me think on what can I do next? What conversation can I have? And your brain wants to do the why. It feels good. It feels good in the moment. And I know some people that give themselves 5 minutes every day that they get all the bad out. They shout, they scream, they ask the why question, and they say, okay, enough. Now let's focus on, so if that works for you, go for it. And I think again, it's being merciful with yourself. And I know a lot of people can say that, be kind to yourself, but it really is. I think everyone I know right now on the Zoom call is doing the best that they can. I really don't believe anybody woke up this morning and said, I am going to do the worst job I can ever do. I'm going to be the worst parent. I'm going to be the worst friend. No one does. We wake up with a sense of hope. We wake up with a sense of I am doing, and sometimes things don't go okay, and that's okay. And I think it's being merciful with yourself to say, maybe that didn't go well, or that meeting was a disaster and I didn't prepare, but it's okay. It's okay. That's a lemon. That's a lemon being thrown at me. So let me take that lemon, cut it open, and I'll squeeze out what I need to learn from the situation.
I love that, Maura. Squeeze out what I need to learn. Mix it with a bit of sugar and then move on. No, I love that, because I think, again, along with resilience, another buzzword has become authenticity. But what you're speaking about there in connection with people who build resilience is the people who are authentic, the people who are real. So maybe people are feeling like, I'd rather use the word real again. Authentic has kind of become this fakey, flaky thing. But the people who are self-aware are the people who are prepared to say the good and the bad. So when people are interviewing somebody and they're looking for someone who's in the process of building resilience, then we're saying that they can look for authenticity as a trait. We're saying that they can look for somebody who's reflective and learning from their reflection. So someone who can talk about a scenario and what they learned from that, and that they are actually in touch with visible changes that they've made as a result of mistakes or unfortunate situations. So those are really great key behaviors to look out for. And I think I really, as you were talking about how we view things, it reminded me of a coaching session I had this morning that was actually quite heartbreaking for me, because it's with somebody who contacted me yesterday, and she'd heard me in a conference, and she's just starting out in her career. She's 25 years old, and she was dismissed from a company 18 months ago. And she contacted me and she said, Jane, I haven't been able to get a job for 18 months, and I'm going for an interview next week. Please, can you help me? And my heart always just really goes out to people like that. I think there's no shortage of people like that in our pandemic. But I connected with her, and she said, one of the things that keeps coming up is when I was with my last company, I was dismissed. And it was interesting. Linnell and I were actually having she's on this call, we were having a kind of virtual working session, and I didn't mention names, but she mentioned how often it is that people who are dismissed is because it's an unfair situation. So that was very much top of mind for me. And so we did this kind of role play interview, and I said to her, so, Susan, why did you leave such and such a place? So she said, well, and she said she almost freezes when she hears this question, and she almost froze again, and she was like, well, I was dismissed. So I said, okay, and what was the reason for that? She said, well, negligence. But her view of herself and her confidence has been so impacted by the situation that even though it was unfair, she has taken on that negativity. And by the end, she was so close to tears when we talked about how that doesn't define her. If she looks at her talents and her strengths and the competence she does have, those are the things that she can focus on as she moves forward. And the thing that she talked about is, I said, just tell me the story of how it happened. And when she told me the story and the unfairness of the manager who did this,
Wow.
and her colleagues who said, oh, I'm going to leave then, or come and work somewhere else, it really gave such a different slant. So I think along with what you're saying with resilience is it's so important to take stock of the narrative we tell ourselves about the past and the narratives we talk about in an interview. Because how we tell the story of what has happened to us influences how other people perceive us. So of course, interviewers since then have viewed this negatively because all she said is, I was dismissed for negligence.
Wow.
She never told the story of the unfairness and what she's learned from it and how it impacted her.
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying about the stories we tell and how we see things, because that really is that process of taking those lemons, slicing them open, and as you say, squeezing out what we can learn.
Yeah.
So thank you, Maura. I really, really am so appreciative of your time. I know it's not just the people at the hospital that are clamoring for your time. You also have two gorgeous young sons, who those of us who know you just absolutely adore, and a wonderful husband and many friends. So we really do appreciate you giving this time to us and sharing this opportunity that we can learn.